Hello. My name is Betsy Corcoran, and I am co-founder and CEO of EdSurge, and we are really thrilled to be here with you today for this podcast webinar all about using technology in combination with Google and Nearpod. A couple of very quick introductory remarks before we get to really the meat of this webinar. As I said, my name is Betsy, and I founded and run EdSurge, and we are a news information resource all about education technology. We do programming events. We have lots of news and stories, and we're really thrilled to be doing this webinar today. For today's webinar, we've lined up a really fantastic group of educators for a conversation on how to combine your tech tools, namely Nearpod and Google, so that lessons are really sparking engagement. And we've got some pretty exciting news for you today, which is that last night Nearpod launched a Google Chrome extension, so you are going to get all of the information here first. A quick note before we really get started, this webinar will be recorded, and that recording will be made available to you via email after this event. We'd also like to thank Nearpod for the support that makes this webinar possible. Nearpod is, as I think many of you know, a pretty powerful tool that allows educators to create interactive lessons in minutes and download and customize ready-to-run lessons. Finally, there are going to be a number of moments to ask questions throughout this webinar via discussion boards in Nearpod using a unique URL that I'll give to you in just a minute. So right now, let's start by introducing the panelists on today's call because it's a very special group. We're going to get our start here from Amber Calderon, who's Nearpod's social media marketing manager, and she really focuses on amplifying teacher stories and really keeping teacher needs at the heart of everything that she does and is passionate about transforming teaching through technology. Amy Moffat is a Nearpod pioneer, namely someone who loves using Nearpod and has all of the training and certification to really help other people do that well. She's taught science at Van Junior High School in East Texas for more than a decade, and she's super passionate about using technology to really engage students. Matt Ortega is a lifelong learner born and raised in South Texas, in Beeville, Texas. He's teaching 6th through 8th grades in pre-AP and GT Science for the Joe Bernhardt Magnet Academy. As the Beeville ISD Teacher of the Year, just last year, Matt really is pushing himself and his students to be their very best, both inside and outside of the classroom. Next up, we have Amy Petrosky, who's a 6th grade ELA and social studies teacher in Gambrillis, Maryland. She's taught all grade levels and subjects, in part because she's got a husband who's got a terrific Army career. So she's been in many places. She also has a master's in educational technology from Michigan State. And she too has been a pioneer for just about a year. Finally, we have Korra Zayas, who's a bilingual teacher from North Fort Worth, Texas. She's also a Nearpod pioneer and a trainer, and she got the Tugboat Award for connecting with other EdTech tools in the Nearpod Transform 2019 conference. She's passionate about her 2 education policy fellowships, and she stays busy working with graduate students at Purdue University. I am going to turn this conference call over to Amber, and I want to remind you that you should go to nearpod.com or Nearpod app. And if you enter the code DLMIY, just like that, DLMIY, then that's going to be a great place to put in some questions and engage in this conversation. So Amber, over to you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I am equally as excited to have hopefully some brand new faces and those that also have used Nearpod but are unfamiliar with all that we're about to share. In true Nearpod fashion, we are running this presentation on Nearpod, and every single one of the panelists have weaved interactive activities within their presentations. So you definitely want to go to the Nearpod app or nearpod.com and enter the code that you see on your screen. We encourage you to collaborate with each and every one of us. We're going to be live tweeting during this event. So if you see a slide that really resonates with you, screenshot it, upload it to social media, tag Nearpod and EdSurge, and that way we can connect with you. And you don't want to keep these ideas a secret. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'm just the person moderating, but these friendly people have all the good stuff. Amy's going to be talking about the ease of including and embedding all of the Google Drive items. Coral's going to talk about how to use Nearpod in that blended and flipped classroom and also leverage those Google tools along the way. Amy Moffat's going to talk about all the seamless and simple differentiation that you can use. That way, you have your own toolkit, but how can Nearpod and Google work alongside you in that effort? And Matt, our data-driven person, is going to all talk about tracking student progress so you're not sitting there late at night trying to assess student understanding on your own. So first up is Amy. So I'm going to pass the baton off to her.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to share with you all today just a few of the ways that I integrate and use my Google Apps with Nearpod. The first thing I want to mention to you all is you can take notes. So maybe you're a pencil and paper taking note person, but maybe you like to take notes along with Nearpod. So we have that feature for you. It's right on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you click the little notes icon and ask to save to your Google Drive, all you have to do is sign in with Google and then add notes as you go along, just right within the Nearpod web page. And it will save all of the pages that you've written notes about in one document right into your Google Drive. So that's the first exciting feature that we have for you today. Next up, I wanted to share with you just the way I use slide decks. And you think, well, yeah, you can use your slide decks and you can share them via Google Classroom. But there are so many times that I want my students to interact with that content. And so I do it through Nearpod. My first step is to know where my slide deck is. So my pro tip here is, well, I have a couple of them, but my first one is I usually open things up in Google, so they always appear in my recent items. So after I've located the slide deck that I want to use with my students, at the bottom of your Nearpod screen when you're creating a lesson, there's a spot to choose and upload your slide decks straight from Google. So that's number 2. And then it will show you all of the slides in your deck, and you can choose the ones you want. And once you get them uploaded, you can also convert them to draw items. And that really makes the slides interactive so that the students can use what you've given them and annotate it in a special way, show you that they understand what you're talking about, highlight things that you are really wanting them to make sure that they understand. So we're going to scoot right on to the next one, which is exactly what I was going to do. If you also want them to interact with images, we have a writing program that has a lot of amazing mentor texts. And a lot of times when I have a class of 30 students, it's really hard to do a read aloud with 30 middle school students. So what I like to do is upload the pictures. You can see I use an app called Scannable, so all of my stuff is named Scannable. My pro tip here is to rename those things before you try to import them into Nearpod. So once you get them uploaded, you can again make them slides that the students can interact with or draw upon. One of the other things that you can do is if you have a series of pages in a book, you can upload them as a PDF and put that PDF in a viewer kind of view. So if you can see, it's a little tiny, but in the middle of the screen, you'll see that the number 3 picture has 7 out of 15. So that is a series of pages, not the whole book, a series of pages that I wanted my students to look at along with me, but I didn't necessarily need them to interact with. so that they could go ahead and refer back to that. Let's see, so moving along, another favorite way of mine to use Google Apps is forms. And one thing that you'll want to do before you even start is to make sure that your form is collecting the information that you want. So if you want it to collect their email addresses, or if you're not collecting email addresses, you have a spot for their first and last name, so that when you get all that good information back, you can find out who submitted what. The second thing is, in your Google form, you'll want to find the link. And once you have that link copied, you're going to go ahead and get ready to put it into Nearpod. So back over in your Nearpod screen, there's an option to add web content. And this is where you click and add that link. And then it'll pop right into your presentation. And my pro tip for this one is, if you are using the same form throughout a unit, you'll be able to collect how your students have grown throughout that whole unit, starting at the beginning and then maybe midway through, and then towards the end of your unit, when you have taught several lessons using Nearpod and Google Forms, you'll have that really rich data collection tool that you can then analyze how your students have learned. So that is that page. And then my last pro tip is almost obsolete, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you anyway. This is one of the ways that you can share your presentations, your Nearpod lessons with your students. There's a Share with Google Classroom button right in the sharing feature of Nearpod, and it will pop up a window for you, and you can go ahead and assign it to any classroom. It doesn't have to be an assignment. It could be an announcement if it's just something that you want to interact with but aren't necessarily going to grade. My students are a one-to-one iPad group, and so sometimes when they click the link from Classroom, it doesn't necessarily go directly. It will go into the app but not pull up the presentation. So my pro tip here is that the code is actually at the end of the URL. So it says, for this one, at the end of the Nearpod URL, it says CBWLP way down there at the end. And I definitely point that out to kids because they say, I don't know the code. And I say, oh, the code is there. It's always there. And then just in terms of when you want to choose what you're using with your students. If you want to use the same presentation with your students, then you can assign it to all of your classes at the same time. But if you are looking to divvy that up into classes, then assign each class a different code. And I think that's all I have about that. But I would love to hear your questions because I know I talked really fast and I had a lot to say, but I can always be more clear. So please share your questions. I'm here to answer them.
Amy, I'm going to pop back on here while we're waiting for some questions to go into the Collaborate board. For those new to Nearpod, this is our Collaborate feature. It's a teacher favorite, and we consider it like a digital parking lot. So you can add your thoughts here. So I'm going to say hi, everyone. You can
even attach great question.
An image. So very good question about the Google Classroom. So you will still be able to, what Amy just shared is still possible. You're going to hear some news. You're going to hear it here first on EdSurge, but you're going to have to stay till the end so you can hear why Amy made that statement. So I'm going to mums the word until it's Coral's turn. If you're also new to Nearpod, go ahead and ask some questions too. Maybe you're seeing some buttons you're not really sure about.
Well, so I'm going to answer this question. Not necessarily, but you can download your Nearpod reports and send them right over to Google Sheets. So once you have that Nearpod report in Google Sheets, then you can take that information and do what you want with it. If you're using the Nearpod reports, if you're using a Nearpod quiz. So not necessarily with the Google Forms, but maybe
you can also add Google Forms as a web link if that's the way that you best want to receive specific information. Nearpod also has different formative assessments such as open-ended questions, multiple choice polls, where there's also a report section. And as Amy shared, you can download that either in Sheets, as a CSV, whatever your little heart desires to be able to look at that data. And the best thing too is all of those reports are housed in your Nearpod reports. So I remember back to my days of teaching, you can't lose it.
Amber, can you take that question? I'm not a 365 user.
So we actually have a webinar all about using a Nearpod with Office 365 products. So I'm going to link that here. So if you go to the best thing about the Collaborate boards, if you go to nearpod.com/resources, scroll to on demand webinars, we have a 45-minute webinar where you can learn all about all of the Microsoft 365 products. The great thing is that Nearpod fits into any ecosystem. We like to consider ourselves the most comprehensive student engagement platform because we know that teachers have different teaching styles. Every district is made and pieced together differently. So that's why we have those different levers so you can determine which one to pull. Amy, thank you so much for sharing. If you have any questions that we're maybe glossing over, feel free to bring it up in the next section. We'll have another Collaborate board. Korra, you're next, all about how to use Nearpod in a flipped and blended classroom.
Thank you, Amber. So again, my name is Korra Zayas. I teach in Fort Worth, 6th grade STEM and social studies, and I'm going to talk and focus on differentiating with Nearpod and Google in a flipped or a blended classroom. So Amy kind of set us up by showing us how to share lessons in Google Classroom, and I do have the awesome pleasure of showing you our new integration here at the end. So one of the ways that I use Nearpod in my flipped or blended classroom, and it really just depends on my class. I have very different needs. I teach an academy, I teach bilingual students, and I teach a general ed ESL mix. So differentiation in my classes is a really big deal. When I want to do this, first off, of course, I'm going to start in Nearpod and choose the lesson that I want. I'm a huge fan of the Nearpod VR, so I chose one of my favorites to show you how this works in my classroom. Many times I do it at the beginning of the unit, especially to build background knowledge for my students. Knowing that most of my students are ESL learners, this really helps them when we're walking into a unit. So the VR is one of the ways that I do this to build their content knowledge up front. So this is one of the VR lessons, the ecosystems explore the ocean. Once I've chosen that lesson in Nearpod and I click the share button in Nearpod, I have a few options. I can choose the live lesson or I do student paced. For my flipped classroom lessons, I always choose student paced because it allows me to give it to my students to use on their time when they're working through a Hyperdog or another assignment I have them working on. So I choose the Google Classroom integration on the share link in Nearpod, then I choose my student pace lesson. Amber, you can go ahead and go to the next piece. Once I'm there, you saw part of this from Amy. I'm allowed to choose whatever class that I want to integrate it to. Something I want to add on to Amy is I teach multiple sections. So while in this first step, I can only choose one class I want to add it to, later on, in the third picture here, the bottom left corner, right where it says sample webinar Messiahs, I can actually click there and see all of my courses. So if I want to give it to more than one section, I can do that at this step of the game. And then I will provide the instructions that I have for my students and assign it. Again, in Google Classroom, I have the options of the assignment that I want to grade, or I can post it as an announcement if it's something that we're going to work on together at this point. Go ahead and go. Thank you. All right. So again, I mentioned at the very beginning, a huge reason that I use the self-paced lessons with my Google Classroom to differentiate is to really build that background knowledge for my students. I'm also an avid fan of Hyperdogs. So self-paced lessons for me really help when I'm either differentiating a Hyperdog or any of my students are working through a Hyperdog. It's helping them build background knowledge, and it's also helping my early finishers and GT students move ahead. So when I'm designing my Hyperdog towards the end, when I'm adding Nearpod lessons, I give additional opportunities for my students to extend their lessons. So in that case, I might be adding in an additional VR lesson that they can do, or it might be the next level up Nearpod lesson on the topic. It's just a way to constantly be differentiating as my students are working in that flipped blended learning classroom that I develop. And here's where I get to announce the awesome, exciting news. So Nearpod just released a Google Chrome extension that will work directly with your Google Classroom. We want to take an opportunity to share with you the introduction video so you can see how it works. It is free and you can use it on any version of Nearpod you have, whether you have whichever version of Nearpod you have, you can use this extension. Here's an opportunity if you guys have any additional questions for me about the section that I just covered or the new Google extension. Amber, do you have a link that we can share the video after the presentation as well in case they want to look at that a little slower? But when you're in Google Classroom, before we do that, and normally you create your assignment, now you'll have the opportunity to actually choose Nearpod lesson and it will connect with your Nearpod library if you're logged in through your account.
Thanks, Korra. I'm glad that you got to drop the news on EdSurge first. So we just added this to the link that I shared above, our spring release. If you're not familiar with that, every quarter, because Nearpod pumps out updates and content updates and product updates faster than I can type. It's absolutely amazing. So we package all of these updates every quarter. The Chrome extension is one of the ones for this quarter. It's one of the many updates that we've added. So if you go there, you'll be able to rewatch the video and share with all of your colleagues.
You're welcome, Antonio.
If there are questions that also pop up after this and you think, oh, I really should have asked it then, you can always email support@nearpod.com and our speedy support team is online so they can answer questions and direct you to those correct avenues.
Oh, great question. So I use Hyperdogs in the flipped blended classroom and I will, while we go into the next channel, I will pull up the link to share with you guys in the next Collaborate board, but there's actually an excellent teacher-driven website that is all about Hyperdogs and teacher-created Hyperdogs. But the idea of it is that it's a student-paced learning opportunity for a flipped blended learning environment. A lot of us that use Hyperdogs use the 5E model. So the Hyperdog is kind of set up in that way to have students work through that model at their pace. I use it in lots of different ways, but I'll get the link while they've started the next section so that I can share that with you because the two teachers that run that website have incredible resources for you to be able to check out.
I agree, Korra. When we built the Nearpod and Hyperdogs webinar, we deferred to them a lot and their book that they wrote to make sure that we were aligning with their methodology when we were sharing best practices with Nearpod. Korra, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the news here on EdSurge First. I think talking about just how it works in your specific classroom and how it differs from Amy's and others, I think showing that 360 view is really important. So thank you for your unique perspective. Another Amy up to bat, Amy Moffat. Can you please share with us all about simple and seamless differentiation using Nearpod and Google?
Sure. Hi, guys. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Another Amy from the Texas area. I'm convinced in the 1970s we were all Amy's or Jennifer's, we must have been. But at any rate, I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Coral and Amy both have said. The opportunity for a teacher to create multiple lessons that differentiate to all different learners as easy as Nearpod makes it, it's just unbelievable. It has completely changed how we can meet our kids' needs. So I teach 7th grade science, and I have a completely included classroom. So that means I have every level of learner, from a GT student to a student with special needs, a student that might not speak English, and everything in between, and about 25 students in a class. And so, of course, I want to reach all of them. And so what I'm going to show you with Nearpod and Google allows me to do that. It is pretty incredible. So the first thing that you can do to differentiate is you can easily duplicate a Nearpod lesson. It's so simple. Once you have created a Nearpod lesson or maybe downloaded one and edited it, you simply go to your library, and from your lesson tile, when you hover over it, you choose the 3 dots and duplicate. It is that simple. And Amber, you can go to the next slide. Once you've duplicated your lesson, it will pop up as that same lesson but with a number, which is really helpful in keeping up with how many different copies you have of this same lesson. But you are going to modify that as needed. And the way that I would modify that, say I have a student that has a reading difficulty. So in Nearpod, I can read those slides with that audio button, and then that now can become a different version. So I can modify it, I can put in anything extra that that student needs and save it, or maybe group of students, I can save that, and a tip is just to number those so you can keep up with what you have going on there. And then you're just going to follow those steps and share in Google Classroom, just like both Coral and Amy mentioned. And the cool thing now about Google, a year ago we could not do this, and now we can. Instead of assigning to an entire class, you can assign to specific students. So the default is directly to all of your class, but you can go in and unselect everyone and only pick certain students, which is really cool because now I can have 3 students that receive this special version. And the student on their end, there's no differentiation. They just open their Google Classroom and there they have a lesson and no one knows that it's different. So that is just a pretty fantastic integration. And that's what this, my first few slides were about. Next, let me show you this. In fact, I just did this yesterday, which was so cool because I think we made this a while ago, and then it turned out that I was covering this. So another really cool thing you can do with Google and Nearpod is you can put in a self-paced lesson when you're gone. So your students don't have to miss a beat. And I use that as my sub-plans. I probably would start off the beginning of the year doing something like this, but once the students are used to my teaching style and they know how to work Google and Nearpod, you can leave a self-paced session with your sub and you're teaching that day, you're just not there. And it is self-paced, which kids love because some kids need a little bit longer to go through those slides. Some kids go faster. But the cool thing is I can be at a conference and access that Nearpod session later in the evening and see how my kids are learning, looking at some of the data of the features that we use. I will point out that when I do a self-paced session, which I did one yesterday, I always include a graphic organizer. Still firmly believe in writing with the real pencil and paper, and I know Nearpod does as well. There's a lot of research on that still is an important piece of learning. So I will include that with that self-paced session, so that way I know that they are getting key points. Since I'm not teaching it live, I want them to have certain things that stay with them. And so then they have something physical that they can put in their folders. They have it, I can check over it, make sure that they did understand, along with the data. So those are just some of the ways that I use same tools, but just to differentiate for my sub-plans. And then obviously the graphic organizer thing has gone really well as well. So I believe that's all of my content. What questions do you have that I can answer?
I love that you also mentioned the sub-plans, and that we at Nearpod do believe that you don't always have to be team tech and always have to be team pencil paper, right? You can have a happy mix of both. And also then there's that accountability. Nearpod has over 7,000 K-12 standards aligned lessons, and a lot of those lessons also have graphic organizers attached in them with the lesson guide, because we do believe in that blended experience. Also, imagine having a slide in Nearpod and your students are building numbers using math manipulatives. So you can definitely have that full blended experience. Thank you, Coral, for sharing the Hyperdogs link. In terms of differentiating while people are still pondering on their questions, how you share duplicating a lesson. When you duplicate that lesson, you can also change a multiple choice question to an open-ended question. That way, now you're having those students that you want them to ponder a little more. You can also add reference media, so those students that need accommodations. And what that means is maybe you have the multiple choice question and you've referenced an image. Nearpod has Google images that have already been filtered safely in Nearpod. So now those students that don't understand that word but need that visual can respond.
Okay, so I just received, I can see this question, can you write in a slide, or does it have to be a paper, like for example, Word? So the integration, there's a couple of ways to work around that. It's not directly to Word. You can work in Google now in Nearpod, but if you had something in Word that you wanted to include in Nearpod, you can it can be uploaded as a PNG and converted that way. But I don't think, and Amber, you might help me out with this, I don't think you can put a Word document unless you did a link to that document in Nearpod.
So one example, if you want people to draw on it, so what you're seeing on the screen right now, and if you're logged into Nearpod, I just did a really fancy trick called add activity, because at Nearpod we believe in teachable moments. So I can add draws, different questions and polls on the fly. So for example, let's pretend you were students. Somebody had a question and I needed to pivot quickly and didn't want to run to gather paper. So in this activity, you can add a KWL chart, or you can add a text that you want your students to highlight, text evidence, or somewhere in there. So this is an example how they can essentially draw on a slide. You can also add text. Is my answer. So those students, because you have students that respond best. Some may want to draw a picture to show their knowledge. Some may want to answer with text, or I can also add a picture and use Google Images that have already been filtered. I can now pick my image and add it in, and I can resize it. And let's say I also wanted to label that image. So again, leaning back to the very flexible, different students' styles as well as different teaching styles. I'm gonna switch back to teacher view for this. And what I can do is I can see the people who have responded. And if you're logged into Nearpod, I can share my response. So if you're logged into Nearpod right now, you should see what is on this screen right here. This allows me to highlight, you have your Pop-Tarts that always answer questions really quickly, but your crock-pots that need to simmer and think about their answers. I can also accommodate and give every student a voice in that lesson. I'm gonna close the act. Oh, keep going, Coral.
I was just going to say, Amber, you're showing them the draw it feature. So
yes,
that's a way to do something physical, to write in Nearpod without it being on paper. And then, of course, she would have all that data at the end of the session. She could go back and look at that.
Exactly. Amazing. So again, if anybody has any questions, Matt's next on the podium to share all the Nearpod and Google love. So if you have any questions, you can always ask him at the end of his section too. Thank you so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
Matt, you've got a lot of great slides all about tracking student progress and how to collaborate and do something with that data. So will you share all of those insights?
Absolutely. I like to say, like, I'm the pretty bow that wraps everything up, because everyone before me spoke about just about what I'm going to talk about, but now let's integrate it all together. So right now what I'm going to be talking to you all about is test prior knowledge, typically through a Nearpod quiz, having formative assessments, either as an exit or as an intro ticket to gather knowledge. Now, I use formative assessment exit tickets usually after notes or through Google Classroom forms, through the Nearpod add web content, as Amy said earlier. And I'm going to show you step by step on how to do that specifically. Excuse me, guys. The next thing I'm going to be doing is how to track that data and how to use that with Nearpod, and how to immediately import grades through Google Classroom. Because I know I am busy, I'm a coach, I'm on the leadership team, and I have a life on top of that. So I really don't like taking papers home to grade, but it's part of our job. So I found a way to take care of it for me. So let's go ahead and talk about that real quick. So let's go ahead and talk about how to put a Google Classroom quiz into your Nearpod. So as you're making a Nearpod slide, you go to the Add Web Content page right there in the middle. And then what you're going to do, you are going to type in your URL. Now, you don't know what your URL is. So I'm lucky to be working at a one-to-one school where each student has their own laptop. And that may not be the case for you, but if you can still use and integrate Google Classroom, this is where you do it. So what I do here is I go ahead and put the URL for my Google Classroom, which you can find that at the top of your Google Classroom page. Now, this is an actual page from my students last year. You find that link at the top, you put that into the URL that it asked for, and then what you do on your Google Classroom page is you actually have that quiz ready to go. Because the Add Web Content is basically a new page for the students to go to. So it's a little web browser within Nearpod. So they will log in through Nearpod. So when that page comes up on your slide, go ahead and turn it. Okay, so when your students come up to this, they're going to click and open that page. They're going to be asked to log in through Google, and then it's going to take them straight to their Google Classroom, which is great. So then they will go and they'll take their quiz as they normally do, as a formative assessment, or as a bell ringer, or as I use it just to gather knowledge at the beginning to see where we're starting. And then you can do that, and then at the end have your final formative assessment, and you can view the responses. I think somebody said earlier that it's wonderful if you use the same form to gather that knowledge. That's exactly what I use it for. And or if you want to have a final quiz at the end of the day, you can have that too. So when on the screen there, it says view responses. So once all your students have marked that assignment as done, you can view those responses, and it'll pop up as a summary. Now this is again all through, you can integrate through Nearpod, you can do it yourself through there, or you can do it in your Google Docs, either way. So you release the scores to the students. So you see your report here of the students' scores, but then you can release those scores. That release button there, as long as you made the key on your Google form, it grades it for you. That's been the greatest part about this. I love it because I use Nearpod so much, and I use Google Classroom. It just brought everything together. So that release of score gives my students instant feedback. What did I make? How did I do? And I teach AP and GT kids, so maybe some of y'all can relate to me. They want to know their grade immediately. So this has made my life so much easier, and it's been wonderful. All right, so now to my favorite part. You've been using the collaboration board throughout the whole time. Now, I started using it a little bit differently as in my student vocab walls. I've just seen so much student empowerment when it comes to taking charge of their learning of vocabulary. It's been awesome because the kids want to be the coolest, they want to be the funniest, they want to be the best. So this collaboration board, I use it as a word wall for them. And that's usually at the beginning of my lessons. And I usually make them define the word, give an image of the word. You can use a GIF or a GIF if you're one of those people. And then I make them redefine it in their own words. So it's been a lot of fun to see the tangible knowledge and the student ownership of vocabulary. And the really cool part about it is, if you haven't noticed, on the collaboration boards, there's those little hearts there. And so students can send some love to an answer or send some love to something funny. So they do that, and then it's wonderful. So then the students feel great about their response too. Now, the best part about this is you can, again, share the board to the Google Classroom for the student learning. So as long as that assignment is there and it's live, you can send that link to them. And you do that by hitting at the top of the page. At the top of the page, there's a little share button. You hit that, you get the link, and just like you did earlier, you copy that link into your Google Classroom, and so that way it's there as an announcement. So you click that share button there again, you'll hit the link key, and then you're gonna copy that link, and then as you go to the Google Classroom, you can add an announcement or content or whatever you'd like. Add the link on there and then post it to your Google Classroom, and it's there forever. And there it is on their word wall. So as long as the students can go back and track that, the unit word wall is there, and they can look at it any ways they want to. So do you have any questions about the collaboration board or anything else that we've said? Feel free to ask.
I'm still laughing that you said you were the pretty bow that tied it all together because that was so perfect. I love that you tied it back up, how to, yes, empower the students, and also what do you do at the Collaborate board after the fact and how they can go back and view it again. And a lot of people forget that share button exists. So that feedback alone was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm a young teacher and I'm trying everything new. So one of the things I've learned is I love the student, and I love to see that light bulb and that ownership that they have has been the biggest thing. And Nearpod really does have all the tools to do that. So we do have a question here. Does the collaboration board log you out in classroom only last as long as the code is active? So as long as you have that lesson open, in my findings, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Amber, as long as that lesson is there, that collaboration board is there too. I think you can extend that lesson open for a certain amount of days, correct?
Yes, Nearpod, again, a backup to constantly updating and enhancing the product. We have increased live lessons to be 365 days. So it can last your entire school year. You can also share the link post-session, so it'll pop up so you can read it and you can link that as well as the Nearpod as a whole.
Absolutely. So when integrating Collaborate into the Google Classroom, are the posts seen in real time? So just like now when you're seeing when we post these, they pop up almost immediately, but there is a way to filter, and that's something I learned really quickly. So you can, I don't know if you saw on Amber's screen, you can go and there's an option to view the post before, and that's kind of crucial. I teach junior high kids, and I learned that really quickly to go ahead and moderate that. And so if there's something that maybe wasn't necessarily accurate, I always alter it. I'm like, hey, bud, go back and look at this. I'm going to deny this one, but let's see your next one. So that's been a lot of fun. Do I have any issues of students going back between Nearpod and the classroom? No, I don't, because what I do is I do it on live pace. And so when I have live pace, that slide, as long as it's open to the web content slide, it'll stay on that. And I even put a timer on it. So if you can put a timer on it, the students know, oh, I only have 10 minutes to be on here. And the moment I switch that slide on the live pace, it's gone, they're done, they're sticking with me. I'm pro very live lesson, so that way I know what's going on at all times in my room. But that's a great question.
Matt, you mentioned timers. So for those, because this is another new feature, we've added timers to live lessons on specific activities. So these timers, they can be 30 seconds, they can be an hour. So it just depends on the level of complexity of the ask, but being able for students to self-monitor their time management skills, and then the timer also changes colors so they also see it. It's really fun to see in a classroom setting that one champion, if it's a table group, say, come on guys, we only have a minute left.
Can you also see at the bottom of the screen if your students are not in the lesson? Well, again, she just pulled it up right here, and you can start to see the students that are in there or not in there. Maybe they logged out. But the cool thing about Nearpod is you can put so many collaborative activities in there. It pops up on your teacher feed. So what you see as a teacher and what you see as a student is completely different. So if you start noticing, my classes are 20. So if it says 17 of 20 students have submitted, you can go back and look specifically, hey, you haven't submitted something, you haven't done this yet. Can you please go and I need you to stay on task. And again, I see it, that's why I love the live lesson, is because you can monitor that completely. I did find when I do the flipped and the blended, the student pace is great, but I personally, I'm very pro live lesson. But that's the cool thing about all four of us, that we're all different about it.
Very good point. All teachers have different teaching styles, and it's going to be flexible. And then, yes, as we shared, you can see which student is not in Nearpod. So if they get out of that device, go to another app, they start texting somebody, you can use zone of proximity to get that student back on task. Leela is a Nearpod team member, so you better believe I'm going to go tell her that she was not fully paying attention to this webinar. I'm going to leave this up for just a few more seconds before we start to wrap up. So if you have any last minute questions or want to just say some words to the panelists, feel free to use this time to do so. And I can say, one of my favorite things is to add GIFs into the Collaborate board.
Thank you for saying that properly. I'm really proud of you.
So the question is there any way to message a student directly in a Nearpod lesson? As of right now, the ability to go and directly message a student is not a feature that is currently enabled. However, Nearpod allows you to unchain yourself from the teacher desk and the giant board on the screen. You can still use it, but since you can run it from any device with a Wi-Fi connection, you're able to easily walk over and intervene with targeted coaching immediately because you're getting those immediate assessments without having to grade. So it's not a direct way to message, but you do now have that flexibility because of Nearpod. Okay, everyone, I'm gonna pass the baton off so we can start to close things out.
Thank you very much. This is Betsy Corcoran again, and wanted to let you all know that we'll have a short list of resources that we've referred to during this webinar that we'll make sure that you get afterwards. We'll send you this list, and as well as a link to the webinar and some of the other resources and videos that we had, and especially to that video that talks about the new integration with Google. That was pretty cool to hear that today. We'd also be happy to hear back from you. What are the topics that you want to hear us talk about in webinars in the future? We really do want your feedback. So a huge thank you to our fantastic collection of webinar panelists. Once again, you put your time, your heart, and all of your wonderful intelligence into lending your insights and really helping make all of teachers better. Obviously starts with you, Amber, Amber Calderon, Amy Moffat, Matt Ortega, Amy Petrosky, and Korra Zayas. And a special thanks to Nearpod. I think we've seen some really cool applications today that really help students take ownership of their learning. We've heard some terrific tips. Personally, I confess I love Matt's board with all of the vocab projects. That was pretty awesome. Something maybe we could even use at EdSurge, who knows? But Nearpod is overall really helping students take ownership, helping teachers increase students' access to information, ideas, interactions, and really supporting and enhancing making sense of the world, which is really at the core of taking ownership of knowledge. And of course, there's a lot more of this information all available at nearpod.com. Again, I'm Betsy Corcoran, CEO of EdSurge, and for more news and resources all around the way technology shaping the way we learn and teach, you can sign up for free newsletters and get more at edsurge.com. So again, thank you all so much for your time, and please feel free to check out other webinars that we've done at edsurge.com/ewebinars. Thank you, and have a great day, and hope that you have many opportunities to learn. Thanks.